Welcome to Chautauqua People. My name is John V. Our guest today is Jay Summerville. He was born in Pittsburgh, considers himself to be a native of Corey, Pennsylvania, is a graduate of Carleton College in Minnesota, Washington University Law School in St. Louis, and Eden Theological Seminary in Webster Grove, Missouri. Jay, how did your family make its way to Chautauqua?
Oh, that's a long story. My maternal grandmother went to college about during the First World War, and while she was in college, she worked as a chambermaid at the Athenaeum Hotel in Chautauqua, and eventually, later she married, and they lived south of Pittsburgh in a steel mill town, had 4 daughters, and every year they would make a trip from south of Pittsburgh up to Cambridge, where my grandfather was from, to visit his parents. And one time in about 1930 or 31, my grandmother talked my grandfather into stopping at Chautauqua just to see what it was like. So they did, and my mother and her 3 sisters were thrilled because there was no ore dust and it was beautiful. And they pleaded, "Can't we please stay? Can't we please stay?" So my grandfather said, "Okay, you can stay a week." So they stayed in a rooming house with my grandmother, shared bathroom at the end of the hall, shared kitchen. And he said, "I'll go back home and I'll drive up next weekend and get you." Now, there was no interstate then, so it was a long trip. Well, you can imagine, the next week he came up and my mother and her sisters pleaded, "Can't we just stay another week? Can't we stay another week?" Well, that went on and on and on, and they ended up staying the whole summer. And then, after that, they came every summer, even during the Depression, which was amazing, because they were not wealthy people. But they just loved it. They loved Chautauqua. So then when my father, after the war, went to dental school, and that's why I was born in Pittsburgh. And my mother talked to him when he was deciding where to set up his dental practice. She remembered how beautiful Corey is, or was, because they drove through it on their way up from Monessen. So she talked him into practicing there. So I grew up 25 miles from Chautauqua. Eventually, my grandmother lived at Chautauqua year-round after her husband died, and so I've been around here a long time.
So did the sisters buy a house?
They did. I think each of the sisters except one, my mother's older sister, and then one of her younger sisters. And my mother, after my parents were divorced, my mother bought a house in Chautauqua. But then she moved to Florida to teach school in about 1977. And decided she couldn't afford to keep that, and I'd been practicing law for 4 years, and I was just still trying to save enough money to buy one house, so I couldn't buy hers. But eventually, in 1990, I bought my house at 20 South Avenue, and so I loaned it for 36 years, and that's my Chautauqua story. I have dozens of cousins running around. I have a lot of cousins at Chautauqua.
The same surnames, are they?
No. Well, my cousin Denny Stallsmith lives right down the road in Mayville, and she has 4 children. I have my Aunt Murr married Arch Moran, so I've got a number of Moran cousins, but many of them have married. So now we're down to the next generation. So. When I get invited to weddings now, it's usually first cousins once removed, because but there are a lot of us running around, so it's wonderful to see them.
That's great. So that makes for big parties when you want to have
exactly
the whole family there. Now, where did you live on the grounds as a child?
Well, my grandmother had originally. My grandparents bought a 3-family place on North Terrace, directly behind the Tally Ho. And so oftentimes we would come over and stay with her, and especially when I was a kid, I would come over and stay with her. After that, we would often rent a place for a month.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not far from Corey, but I loved it. And I went to boys club, went to children's school, and then went to club
Mm-hmm.
from group 1 to SAC, and we'd rent different places.
So you've been through the whole
Yeah.
line there. Now, did that residence adjacent to Tally Ho lead to any kind of employment?
No, my grandmother, after my grandfather died, she was still living in Menneson full-time. But my aunt and uncle were both physicians, and they were, temporarily for 3 years, they were heads of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission in Japan.
Whoa.
So they invited which did research on victims, but also did therapy for victims. And they invited my grandmother to go live with them for 3 years to help take care of their 3 children. And when she came back, she decided to live full-time at Chautauqua. So she bought a house at 40 Foster and fully winterized. So I was over here all the time in the fall and the winter, and we would come over and spend the weekend with Graham, my sisters and I.
So that was the frolic with.
It was a wonderful time. I love Chautauqua I love Chautauqua during the season, but off-season's wonderful.
Very different feel, isn't it?
It is, yes.
It isn't. Now, did you have any jobs on the grounds there?
Oh, yes. We were great friends with the Streeters who owned the Tally Ho, and and their son Johnny was my age. And so I was a waiter there. I did odd jobs there. My sisters were, my mother was a waitress there in the late 30s, early 40s. Eventually, I remember in 1964, I was 15. I worked at Chautauqua, washing dishes at the Spencer Hotel used to have a dining room right across from the present Spencer Hotel. It's now been torn down. That's where the condos are.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a dining room, and my very good friend, Dr. Bill Follansby, who is a year or two older than I, we washed dishes there all summer. Became great friends, so we're still good friends today. And that was fun.
What did your hands look like after a summer of dishwashing?
Well, the one thing I do remember, John, is you probably remember Van Cliburn came to Chautauqua twice, I think. Well, one night,
Mm-hmm.
Van Cliburn was there, and we really wanted to go hear him. But there were so many people having dinner that night. There were mountains of dishes, and we had to do all the dishes. And then when the dishes were done, we had to scrub the floor with Clorox, and we had to clean all the machines and all of that. So by the time we got done, the concert was over. So
Van Cliburn was done.
I didn't get to see Van Cliburn.
Cruel and unusual punishment.
I know.
For making you work that hard.
But it was fun. I enjoyed that. I was 15, and I stayed with Johnny at the Tally Ho, and the regular waiters and waitresses were old enough, but they were over 18, so they would go drinking at night, and they would go on the Lakers. They'd go to Smokes down in Mayville, and then they'd go over to the Marmar, and then they'd go to the Surf Club, and then they'd stop at Snuggs, and by the time they got back, well, we were too young to do that, so we just heard their stories and saw them roll in drunk at
some wee hour of the night.
That's right.
And so all that stuff was gone away.
Yeah,
Now, you had a lot of fun in Chautauqua.
I did.
How did you end up going to college in the Northland like that?
Well, to be truthful, there were several reasons. We had some issues in my family, some perhaps mental health issues, alcohol issues, and I kind of wanted to get a little distance.
Some distance.
So I decided I wanted a college that was very good academically, and Carleton was. I wanted one that was reasonably far away so I could come home at Christmas and in the spring, but not too often. and also that did not have fraternities or sororities, because I knew myself, and I knew I was not a frat guy, and I wanted a serious education. I wasn't interested in partying. So that was basically it. And I looked at a bunch of schools, and I love Carleton. It's a beautiful campus. And in Northfield is a very beautiful little city. And St. Olaf College, which is a Norwegian Lutheran school, is also in Northfield.
So is there much going on between the two of them?
Well, there's an annual football game. That's a rivalry. We didn't, Carleton had sports, but that was not high on the list. It was, and so did St. Olaf. It was not high on their list. But that one game was our big competition. And I remember we would sit on one side and cheer. They would cheer, "Go back to the books, back to the books, back to the books," and we would cheer, "Go back to the church, go back to the church, go back to." It was kind of a little rivalry, but we got along great. It had a wonderful music program there at St. Olaf. But I just went back to Carleton for my 55th reunion last year, and it's only gotten better since I was there.
Go back and do it again if you had the choice.
Oh, absolutely. I would give anything to go. I was between 17 and 21 or 22, and the human brain is not fully developed until you're in your 20s. I wish I could go back now with a life experience that I've had and the maturity that I have and do those 4 years again. You make all kinds of, you try things out when you're in college, and you make mistakes and do some dumb things. I had a wonderful 4 years, but I think with maturity I would have enjoyed the education more.
Now, you went to law school, is it immediately after college?
I did. There was a scholarship that was available to Carleton students at Washington University in St. Louis.
And that's a very respectable university, is it not?
Yeah, and I didn't have any other sources of money. So, because my parents paid for most of my college education, although I always contributed a third every year to college. But law school, I was on my own. So I had a couple loans, got a tuition scholarship, but then I worked all through law school to feed myself.
So what's law school like?
I hated it. To be honest, because I was an English major, English literature, which meant you could spend all your time reading books and writing papers and being creative and thinking. And when I got to law school, I saw it as basically a trade school, where it was very competitive. Everybody was competing to see where they could be and class rank. And I missed all my friends from college. I missed the atmosphere in college. So, and I didn't have much money, so I couldn't go out and have beer with the folks very often. But no, I soldiered through it. I thought, you've got to do it. You got to get this done, and then you'll have all kinds of opportunities. And that turned out to be true.
Yeah. So you made it through law school, 3 years then. Where did you take the bar exam?
Immediately, I took the bar exam in Missouri.
Yeah.
And passed. And then that first year after law school, I worked as a law clerk for a judge on the Missouri Court of Appeals. And I had in mind, I loved Chautauqua so much, and I thought I yearned to come back here and to practice in Chautauqua County. So I came back in the summer of 1974, and I stayed at my mother's house on Ramble. She still owned it then. And I went to Buffalo and rented a room at the University of Buffalo, and I would go up there during the week, and all morning I would spend in a bar review course, because New York is very parochial and wanting you to know all the latest cases by the New York Court of Appeals, the highest court, and so I just cram, and studied all morning, and then I went to the bar review all morning, and then I would study till midnight, and I had a hot plate. I would, a use of a kitchen, so and so it's interesting. It was in August of 1974 that I took the bar exam, and I was just deflated. I was absolutely positive that I'd failed. So I came back to Chautauqua, and I said, don't get your hopes up. I just think I failed. And I remember the day I got back after the bar exam, the Watergate was going on, and my mother had a television, and that was the day that the House committee, I guess it was Judiciary Committee, was voting out articles of impeachment, which was very dramatic. So I remember everybody in my family, we sat around and we all held hands while they voted, because it was a really major thing. Well, anyway, to shorten this, the story, I went to work for a law firm called Brandt and Laughlin, and they had offices in Mayville, Fredonia, and Westfield. So I lived in Fredonia. I was only here 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, in December, the only way you find out in New York whether you pass the bar is you have to look at the New York Times every day to see if the list of people who passed is. So every day I would check the New York Times. In December, I was coming back, and somebody said, "Well, the list is in there." So I looked at the list, and I didn't see my name, and I was really deflated. But down at the very bottom, it said, "All those who passed the exam but who have not yet fulfilled the residency requirement," you had to be an actual resident for a certain amount of time before you qualified, are on. There was a jump to an inside page, and there was my name. So I had passed.
Yeah.
So I practiced here for 8 months, and frankly, I realized I had loved growing up in a small town, but I realized I was not going to be a small town lawyer. That was not my calling. I wanted to be in a bigger pond,
Mm-hmm.
practice a different kind of law, and so I went back to St. Louis because I had contacts. I ended up with a fairly large firm there.
Wow, what a story. Now, so you were licensed and you passed the bar.
I did.
Did you in New York and in Missouri?
That's correct.
Did you have to get yourself do any licensing anymore for New York, or did that just use that for a while?
Well, I wasn't using it, so eventually I just let it lapse because I was not actively practicing here.
Got it.
And so I guess it was a lot of effort for, I could have avoided it, but I needed to do that to get it out of my system,
Mm-hmm.
because that had been my dream to practice in Chautauqua County, and then I realized, that's just a mistake. But your 20s are a time for you to make mistakes like that.
Yeah.
You try things, if they don't work, move on, and I
Mhm.
did, and I
Mhm.
ended up being very happy.
How long was the bar exam for New York then?
2 full days, and one day was a multi-state. They had a series of answers, and you had to choose the correct answer. And one day was essays. They would give you a hypothetical, and you had to identify the issues and what you would do and all that. So it was more rigorous than the Missouri one. The Missouri
Mhm.
one, a much larger percentage of the people who took the Missouri bar passed than the New York bar.
Yeah. Okay, you're going back to Missouri.
Yep,
You practiced law.
I did.
You were in this big firm.
Mhm.
How many lawyers?
Well, by the time I retired in '65, we had 250 lawyers, which is respectable size, and we had 6 offices, 5 in the United States and 1 in Shanghai. And I was a business litigation lawyer, which I don't know how I ended up in business litigation, John, because if you know me, I'm not naturally an aggressive, antagonistic, in-your-face kind of lawyer. But that's the way the law was becoming in trial practice. So I had to steel myself to do it, and I did a good job. I was a good lawyer. And I love my colleagues. It was a wonderful firm. And the last 6 years of my practice, they invited me, they decided that the firm was large enough so that they really needed to have a general counsel to advise the lawyers on conflicts of interest, how to avoid malpractice, how to respond when malpractice was claimed, and there were a number of other responsibilities, such as sorting out conflicts of interest every single day. One lawyer would want to take a piece of business, but we had a conflict because we'd formerly represented the person they wanted to sue or whatever. Some of those conflicts are waivable, some are absolutely not waivable, so I would have to make a judgment. And so I pissed off a bunch of my partners when I had to tell them, you can't take that wonderful piece of business because it's a non-waivable conflict. The other thing that I did was, I had to investigate when we had a whistleblower policy, so secretaries or other lawyers could confidentially report if they saw a lawyer that they thought was doing something illegal, immoral, or unethical, or had some personal problem. So, and that wasn't fun, but it was necessary. So, if a secretary came and said, I think my lawyer has a real problem. He is falling asleep at his desk every afternoon and he smells of alcohol. So you'd have to deal with that. Or I think my lawyer is cheating his clients. His reimbursement requests are padded, or the number of hours he's charging are padded. You'd have to do that. The other thing I did was I was in charge of instructing. I would have seminars for lawyers regularly in each of our offices to give them examples of how to avoid malpractice and talk about the rules and this is what you do. And things, very simple things like, keep your client happy. If you get a phone call, you've got to answer that phone call the same day. And if you're in trial or you're not able to answer the phone, you've got to train your secretary to say, I'm so sorry, he's in trial or she's in trial, but he will call you back just as soon as possible. That way you keep your clients happy. And I taught them, if a happy client is much less likely to claim malpractice, even if you're guilty of it, because they like you, because you have been a friend to them. It's like doctors. You like a doctor who pays attention to you, and clients like lawyers who pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm. So those were your final years in this law firm.
Mm-hmm.
You made a major switch
Mm-hmm.
at the customary retirement age. Tell me about it, if you would.
Well, I didn't come from a background of money, so I knew that I was going to have to earn my own keep and provide for my own retirement. So I did that, and I had a wonderful career as a lawyer. I had since childhood I was a very churchy kid. That was
Mm-hmm.
Church was my safe space, and I had felt a call, but postponed it. And then when I got to be in my 60s, and I've told you this, I wasn't eligible for ordination until the 60s. I was in my 60s because I'm a gay man.
Mm-hmm.
And my denomination didn't consider ordaining gay men or women until 2011. So 2 things happened. I felt I've provided for my retirement, so I don't need to worry about money. I just have enough time to go to seminary and become ordained, and then to be a preacher, do pastoral care work for a while. And so I did. And I was the oldest person in my class. I was the oldest student in the school, and I was older than all the professors. But I absolutely loved seminary. I loved my law firm, but this was such a different environment. And it was so eclectic, you know. First of all, half the people were women, maybe 40% were African American.
Mm-hmm.
We had, you know, people who were older in life, you know, some coming right out of college, but not that many. There were a lot of people. This is, and I loved the content. I loved taking my received faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most of us have a received faith. It's what our parents or our Sunday school teachers, what we learned as kids.
I hadn't heard that term, but it makes good sense.
Yeah, and it was an opportunity to take it apart. You know, to read the Bible, take your beliefs, take them apart, and then come back and put them back together again with a faith that you've really developed yourself. That, you know, it's not something somebody else told you. It comes from within, and you developed it. And so I loved it, and I loved about 7 years. The first 2 years I was a chaplain, a full-time chaplain at a senior living community in Kirkwood.
This was after ordination.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we had 4 levels of care, so I did a worship service each week in each of the 4 levels of care. So I would have to adjust my message to the audience, because we had independent living, we had assisted living, and then we had skilled nursing, and then we had memory care.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't do the same thing. You had to, but I would go around and visit people, and there were a lot of Presbyterians, of course, because it was a Presbyterian place, but there were a lot of Catholics, there were Lutherans, and everybody just seemed to like me, and I enjoyed being, you know, able to go visit with people and chat with them. And I started a book club. I did all kinds of things. I worked very hard at doing it.
I got to backtrack here.
Yeah.
Something we talked about earlier. The bar exam was 2 days.
Yes.
So that 1 day for the state-specific stuff, 1 day for the common.
Yeah. Well,
How many days of examination did they put you through for ordination?
4.
What's the deal?
Well, Presbyterians, and I'm in the most liberal Presbyterian denomination. There are about 8 Presbyterian denominations. Mine's the most liberal. But you know, John Calvin decided that we should be highly educated. So, you know, one of the things about Presbyterians, I had to learn biblical Greek and biblical Hebrew in seminary.
That's tough.
Yeah, because you get tested on them in the ordination exams. And learning those languages in your 60s, it's hard enough in your 20s, but in your 60s, oh my gosh. And Greek is not so bad, because you can learn the rules, and there are a lot of cognates, things that, there are a lot of Greek words that have the same roots as English words, and you can figure it out. Hebrew, there are no Hebrew words that have, you know, any English words that you would recognize. I mean, I know chutzpah, and I know, you know, whatever, mazel tov. So and the rules are, and of course, Hebrew you read the opposite way you do in English, and there's no punctuation in Hebrew script. So over the years, the priests have developed a dot system. They made their own vowels to stick in. it was very hard to learn. And but it was a 4-day examination, and I did it fully by computer. I sat in my study at home, and it was timed. They would give you something you had to do, and you had to answer. So it was 4 days of doing that. They would give you a scripture, and you had to write a sermon about it, or an outline of a sermon. And so it was, and before that, at the end of my second year, they called it the Bible content exam. So it's 100 questions, and they ask you, it's multiple choice. They ask you questions about the Bible, and what is the only gospel in which Jesus is not flogged? Things like that. So I would cram old tests, and I'd make up flashcards, because I realized they often would repeat questions from your, and so I passed that one. But then you got graded. There were 2 different people who would grade each of the 4 segments of the ordination exam, and if I passed each one of them the first time, and I'm very proud of that. I took it after my second year of seminary, and not after my third, and I was so happy. I thought, yay!
Yeah. Okay. So you worked in the senior home.
Yeah, and after that, and incidentally, my mother had moved from Florida in her mid-'80s to St. Louis because I was there, and I was kind of a family caregiver. And she was actually a resident in the independent living part of the facility where I was the chaplain while I was the chaplain. So that was very nice. So
What are you doing now with your faith? And what is your ministry?
I do pulpit supply. Well, after the senior living community, then I worked as an interim pastor, where you get hired by a church. Presbyterians, it takes Presbyterians forever to call a new pastor. They've got to form a committee and interview all these people, and so it's often a year or more between one called pastor and the next called pastor. So they'll hire an interim to come and be the head of staff and the pastor. And I did that for 3 different churches. The most challenging one was I did it during COVID. So I had to, that was when we learned how to have all this mechanical stuff. And there were times when I would be the only person in the sanctuary preaching. Well, there would be a videographer up on the balcony or something, videographing. And we would somehow we filled in hymns, or music and other things. But so people would watch from home. It was church by Zoom, so that was a challenge that year. And then slowly we would repopulate the church, and we would rope off every other pew, and there had to be distance between everybody singing it.
Got it.
Got it.
We're over, but there's one area we've got to talk about for just
Okay.
a minute here, and the staff always indulges me if we go over. You're a sailor.
I am.
Tell us about the sailing.
I love sailing, and I learned at Boys Club at Chautauqua, and I'm not naturally athletic. I don't have great hand-eye coordination, and so I was a good sport. I did all that stuff, but I wasn't great at it, and I felt, but sailing, I was good at, and I loved it. I just loved the feel of the air. They had 3 old wood lightnings at the Boys Club then, and that was my favorite. I was so proud. I was one of the first people in my group to win the sailing award. You had to sail it by yourself and go out and go around a buoy and then dock it and do all these things by yourself. And so I love it. And ever since then, I've had sailboats you know.
And what are you sailing now?
An ensign. It's a 23-foot, and we used to sail lightnings, John, but lightnings, you probably know, are lighter, and it requires some work. If you have to, what we call hike out, you have straps, and you have to hike out to keep the boat from capsizing if there's a lot of wind. As my friends have aged out, we've graduated to the ensign, which is a very sturdy boat. It's got a lead keel, so it's not going to go over, and if it does go over, it's going right to the bottom of the lake. So, you know, there's no danger of capsizing. And we keep it out on a mooring off the sports club, and there's a shuttle from the sports club. Guys and gals shuttle us out, and we get out of the shuttle and shuttle back in.
And how often do you go sailing then?
Every good day.
That's great.
Yeah, today I didn't because I was having lunch with the lecturers this morning, so I didn't go. But and my co-owner, I bought the boat originally, but then Twig Branch, who's been a sailing friend for decades, bought a half interest. So we now share the cost of the boat, which is very nice. Twig's a great friend of mine.
That's great. We are out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And this has been great
I
fun.
talk too much.
No, this is great fun. We'll hear about some things we didn't know about. So do come back.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.